polls that strike me. Number one, of course, is the trend line, which is pretty obvious, but also. I think that we need to keep in mind that a lot of these polls are based on a model of what they expect the electorate to look like. Well, what if Kamala Harris is changing the electorate? What if, in fact, we talk about the enthusiasm behind this campaign that is showing up in increased registrations is actually going to be changing the balance of the electorate. So I think this is obviously good news for the Harris campaign. I'm not sure that it completely captures what's going on. However, having said that, we need to go back to the caveat that given the margin of error, all of these states are in fact tied, but it feels a lot like the trend that we saw in 2020 with the national polls and the way these swing states are breaking. But what a dramatic change from just 30, 40 days ago.
Yeah, completely reshaped campaign. Simone, so let's get you in on these polling. Certainly the vice president is bringing back Democratic voters. Most of these polls don't suggest that Trump is losing support, but rather Harris is gaining support, whether it's young voters, voters of color, other parts of the Democratic base that had cooled on Joe Biden now seem to be re-embracing her. And we're seeing here on this bus tour in Georgia, go to places, rural areas, where Democrats don't normally tread.
The last time a Democrat was in the area that Vice President Harris and Governor Walz campaigned in yesterday and today was actually 1992. Okay, so just think about that. We're talking about Bill Clinton. And so, and obviously he was successful in his quest for the presidency. Look, I think the polls are, I'm going to keep saying this, they are not predictive. They are indicative, a snapshot in time of where the electorate is and how they feel. I think this is also like 2016, but in the sense that there were voters in 2016 that didn't want to tell pollsters that they were supporting Donald Trump. Given all the things he had been saying as of late, the polls before Election Day showed that Secretary Clinton was well ahead of Donald Trump. I do think that some of that could be showing up here as well, but that's why a turnout election is going to be key, and turning out the base, putting together that Kamala Harris coalition, which is base Democratic voters, but is going to include some moderate Republicans and independent voters, is going to be critical in space and places across the country. So Georgia, North Carolina, Arizona, running down them, closing the margins up in some of these rural areas, not necessarily winning them, but again, doing what Obama did in 2008, which brought him a win. Again, very close margins in rural places where folks didn't expect him to do well.
Yeah, and there's also in this poll showing some real impact on some down ballot races. Let's talk about the Senate for a second. In Arizona, here we go. Ruben Gallego at 56%, Kari Lake 41%. Gallego opened up a 15-point lead. Nevada, Jackie Rosen's at 55%, while Sam Brown at 41%. Sizable lead there, too. And in the North Carolina governor race, Josh Stein, the Democrat, has 54%, while Mark Robinson, the deeply problematic Republican candidate, Holocaust denier, we should note, is at 43%. So, Sam, this is certainly encouraging to Democrats. And for a while, as you well know, we have this phenomenon where Democrats down ballot were running well ahead of where President Biden was. Now, Harris has certainly gotten closer, but we still are seeing the Senate and in that at least one case, gubernatorial candidates running ahead of the top of the ticket.
I mean, those numbers are kind of silly, right? Like 15 percentage point, 14 percentage point leads for Democrats in the Senate race. Did I do my math right? Yeah, I did my math right. I just think that's not going to happen. But maybe I'm wrong. But that seems like those would be historically large margins for these Senate races, especially in Nevada, where it was supposed to be a close contest, where it's a very close state. It does suggest, and I'd like Molly's take on this, that there is some latent Democratic enthusiasm out there that Harris maybe hasn't tapped into. And additionally, I actually am less interested in the snapshot polls and more interested in voter registration trend lines and data. And I don't know if, Molly, you have that on your hand, but that seems to be what would be the real tell, right? Like if people are excited, yeah, they'll tell a pollster they're more invested in voting for Kamala Harris or Jackie Rosen or someone. But it's really if they have the energy and the wherewithal to go and register to vote, right? Like that's where we actually will get good data that could give us some foreshadowing of what might happen in November.
Yeah, I mean, this top of the ticket versus down ballot has been sort of baffling to me for a long time because this is not new, right? We've seen with all these races, Biden and Harris now with these Harris has a bigger lead, 2-3 points, but Biden would have a sort of even match. And then you'd go down the ticket and you'd have a Democratic candidate winning by 10 points, 11 points. Now, if you look at previous election cycles, right, we've seen in these high turnout elections, Democrats have crushed it even in red states, right? These ballot initiatives, which are technically not partisan, but have become partisan, have done really well. So I think it is an interesting metric. And look, for these to be right, and maybe they are right. I mean, who knows, but because the reality is none of us know, right? We are trying to poll the shifting electorate that shows up for Trump in 2016, shows up for Trump in 2020 and then doesn't show up in 2022, right? So the question is, this is a very hard metric. And I've asked pollsters before, like, why are you getting such different numbers at the bottom of the ticket, at the top of the ticket, because there's a sense that perhaps they're doing some math to try to poll the shifting electorate that is either incorrect or is just, you would have to have people leave the top of the ticket blank, or you would have to have these kind of Ruben Gallego Trump voters. I don't think there are a lot of those.
Yeah, it's a good point that Trump now, in 2 different presidential elections, has turned out voters who the polls missed.
Right.
And we also just know the polls have been inherently flawed in recent cycles. So we have to keep that in mind. But there does seem to be undeniably some momentum there for the Democrats. And on that, here's how Fox News chief political anchor Bret Baier reacted to his own network's polling yesterday with a close eye on one state in particular.
Georgia remains. It was the closest contest in 2020, decided by less than 1/4 of a percentage point in favor of President Biden. Our recent polling showed the widest gap, 6 points, for former President Trump over President Biden. But now that has closed. Harris has a 2-point lead in our latest poll. It's expected to be a close race. That's obviously within the margin of error, but both candidates are spending a lot of time in Georgia, and if that lead holds, she wins Georgia, she wins the presidency of the United States.
As you might imagine, Elise, Trump's campaign put out a statement calling that poll atrocious.
Which is ironic because they know Fox News can poll and they poll well, and Fox News has respectable pollsters.
They absolutely do, but the Trump campaign is still angry about election night 2020 when Fox was first to call Arizona. But let's talk about this, because as much as for a Democratic presidential candidate, you kind of have to win Pennsylvania. For Republicans, you kind of have to win Georgia. And Georgia now very much in play.
Well, and the fact that now they're having to go on the offensive in Georgia, and the fact that you've got Harrison Walz down there and campaigning and trying to cut down on the margins in rural areas. The chair of the Georgia GOP says that as long as Trump can increase his vote share by 1.5%, then he's still okay in Georgia. So that's really not that much that they have to take away when it comes to the rural vote. So is Trump going to be able to still have the kind of turnout that he's had in past cycles, or is Democratic enthusiasm going to overshadow his enthusiasm?
Yeah, Harris on a bus tour in Georgia now, and some talk that she'll launch one in North Carolina before long. So let's shift gears here. And we've been talking about the controversy surrounding Trump's visit to Arlington National Cemetery this week. It's become a real campaign flashpoint. And Charlie, you have a new piece for The Atlantic with the title, "Trump Dishonors Fallen Soldiers Again." And in it, you write in part this. On Monday, Donald Trump visited the sacred ground of Arlington National Cemetery, where many of America's war dead are buried, and he posed for photos. In the strangest of these pictures, the former president is smiling and giving a thumbs up by the grave of a Marine. It's an image of a man who has no idea how to behave around fallen heroes. The event was supposed to be respectful and private. According to a press pool note, the families of the troops had asked that there be no media coverage in the area where the service members were buried, but Trump seemed to have other ideas. It's hard to see Trump's visit as anything but a campaign stop intended to court the military vote. By now, Trump's use of the military as a prop for his own ends should surprise no one. Despite his vigorous avoidance of military service, Trump has a long history of denigrating the service of others, even as he poses as a defender of the nation's military. Monday's wreath-laying in Arlington was, in part, Trump's attempt to clean up the mess he has created and to establish some credibility as a champion of men and women at arms. But in the end, it merely served to remind Americans how little he understands about service, sacrifice, and heroism. And Charlie, let's get you to expand upon that. We were ticking through earlier in the show the long list of times where Donald Trump has indeed denigrated the service of others, including those who have given their lives for the country. And as you see it, he did it again this week.
Well, this is the great paradox of Donald Trump. You know, his own record of non-service is of course, well documented. But so is this long record of denigrating the service of others and his contempt. And yet he continues to wrap himself as the champion of the military. And many veterans seem to think that he is an ally of the military. But you walk through. You look at this picture that you're showing right now. I mean, there's something deeply unnatural about this. Who posing with a thumbs up in front of the grave of a fallen soldier? Who does that? Somebody who, frankly, just does not understand what the sacrifice means. And you go back through whether it's the attack on John McCain for being a POW, or his suggestion at one point that he did not want disabled veterans to be in an Independence Day military parade because it would make him look bad, or his comments to his former chief of staff, retired General John Kelly. When they went to Arlington in 2017, and they're standing next to John Kelly's son, Robert, who was a lieutenant who was killed in Afghanistan. And Donald Trump said to General Kelly, "I don't understand why they do this. What's in it for them?" Or when he refused to go to the military cemetery in France, calling them losers and suckers. And, for people who've been around Donald Trump, this continues to be shocking that someone who is the commander in chief just does not seem, at some core of his being, does not seem to understand why people give their lives for their country. And again, you want to talk about cognitive dissonance. This is a man who, wants to be thought of as America first, USA, the defender of American strength. And yet when it comes down to it, time and again, whether it's Gold Star families, whether it's Medal of Honor winners, there's something broken in Donald Trump that makes it impossible for him to understand that kind of sacrifice and heroism.
Yeah, certainly. Well said. And as the campaign so often does, they are indeed doubling down on what happened there, refusing to accept any responsibility. And Trump's running mate, J.D. Vance, is doing the same on a different matter after his newly unearthed comments showed him criticizing the president of the American Federation of Teachers for not having children. Let's take a look at Vance's original remarks back in 2021, followed by his new comments yesterday.
So many of the leaders of the left, and I hate to be so personal about this, but they're people without kids trying to brainwash the minds of our children. And that really disorients me and it really disturbs me. Randi Weingarten, who's the head of the most powerful teachers union in the country, she doesn't have a single child. If she wants to brainwash and destroy the minds of children, she should have some of her own and leave ours the hell alone.
Do you think that childless adults can serve in leadership positions? And why is not having kids anti-family?
Oh, absolutely I do. I mean,